Why does America misunderstand its changing demographics? Well, did you know the Census Bureau is part of that? Probably didn't. Let's talk about it. The demographics of the United States is a major political issue today. It's a major public policy issue. Everyone has their own opinion, whether they're liberal or conservative, Democrat, Republican, independent. Everyone has their own opinion. The news talks about it constantly. The social media spheres talk about it constantly. But did you know that the Census Bureau itself is spreading misinformation about the population? How is that possible? Some of you may be saying, aren't they the ones who set it up? Aren't they the ones who run the census? Yes, they are. But they also have terrible classifications for certain racial groups. This includes Middle Easterners, who oftentimes are told you either put down East Asian or Pacific Islander, Chinese, Polynesian, Korean, Indonesian. That's the general idea, that when you hear Asian on the census, you think of that. You don't think of someone from Afghanistan or the Middle East in like Saudi Arabia or Qatar. Or you're told to put down white. Even though they don't, well, some people in the Middle East do look white, many of them don't. They look like their own distinct racial group. And if you thought that was bad for the people from the Middle East or Western Asia, may I introduce you to the mess for census takers that is the Latino population, or Hispanic. I've been told by one of my cousins who is Latino that Latino is the preferred term, but the census puts down Hispanic. But I will be referring to them as the Latino community and the Latin American population. Now, the U.S. Census Bureau is a little weird in how it classifies the Latino population. This is due to the fact that the Latino population has three major racial groups that are the cornerstones of its makeup: the European immigrants, the enslaved African descendants, and the surviving Amerindians, who were not killed by the genocidal plagues that accidentally killed 90% of Native Americans in much of North, South, and Central America in the early 1500s. This has led to a very diverse community inside the Latino population. In the Caribbean, you're more likely to find darker black and brown, heavy African and mixed blood people of darker skin tones, whereas in Argentina you can easily find very pale, very visibly white people. Brazil is a whole mix, and different countries and different communities all look different. This is important to understand, as the census takers have decided that instead of making their own box, Hispanic people will get a little bit of a different form of treatment. Now, anyone who's filled out enough government forms, maybe a form for school, when you have the race box, it's typically white, African American, or black, Asian or Pacific Islander, Native American or Inuit, and at the bottom is mixed race. 2 or more races. What's missing? Latino. Well, that is its own special box that can typically be found either one section above this or one section below it, or in there but in a separate little box. And that is, are you Hispanic or are you not Hispanic? And there's a reason for this, because the government counts Hispanic white people, Hispanic black people a little bit differently. Hispanic white people very specifically. When in 2008, the projections for the U.S. population showed that the U.S. population would finally reach a point where white people would go from being the majority to the plurality of the United States population between the years of 2042 and 2050, they did not include white Latinos on this list. They were counted as other, a minority, even though plenty of white Latinos look white, and if they don't have a Spanish or Portuguese last name, you are not going to know that they are of Latin descent unless they tell you. Which is very funny because essentially a large chunk of the US population is not counted in the group that the government wants them to check off because they have to put a separate checkbox because the government didn't want to put another checkbox on the census, which is kind of disappointing. Now you may say, oh, it's reasonable, and to a degree it is. Here's the problem. When it isn't then implied the way it should be, and everyone thinks that, okay, so in 2042, between the years 2042 and 2050, the country will no longer be majority white, this is a problem. Latino people should have their own box on the base census form, but they don't. Now, in an article for a 2021 report for the Chicago School of Law by Professor Brittany Farr, I do not know how to pronounce her name, she discusses this. She's one of my main sources. In this report, she discusses how the media have failed to portray the actual changing demographics, along with the fact that whiteness as an identity is becoming harder and harder to define, and many smaller white communities are having a bit of an identity crisis of what it means to be white. Now, I will not go into the identity crisis side, as that is not entirely my focus area of this video, but I will talk about the fact that the U.S. media fails to demonstrate the actual U.S. population. Instead, they show what the census puts, which is unfortunately false. Just because some people come from Latin America instantly disqualifies them as being white. Again, the census classifies them as Hispanic white, which is not white. It's Hispanic white. It's different for some reason, even though they look just as white as anyone else. It makes no sense to me. And so, whenever you hear these, oh, the U.S. is no longer majority white, that's actually not true. According to Professor Farr, the United States population is going to stay around 70% white for at least the next 30 plus years. It will probably take over a century for the United States to finally actually reach that true 50% of the population is minorities. And the reason I say this is because white Hispanics should not be considered a minority just because of their last name. This is a problem that has been just blown out of proportion thanks to the media from all sides, from CNN to ABC to Fox, all making similar graphs that Professor Farr demonstrates in her article, showing different graphs, all showing non-Hispanic white births or non-Hispanic white deaths or other forms of white being non-Hispanic white. If you're Hispanic, you're not white. People staying the same or the population decreasing, and the Hispanic white population, along with others, increasing. I feel like this is a big disservice to Hispanic peoples who are white. Sorry, Latino people who are white. And the reason I made this video was simple. You need to understand that while the census may say one thing, the reality is a different thing. The United States is going to continue to be a white majority country for decades to come. Because I need to ask, if you showed me Ted Cruz, and you asked me, and I didn't know who Ted Cruz was, and you didn't tell me his name or anything. You just showed me a picture and said, is this guy white? I would say yes. If you showed me Marco Rubio, I would say the same thing. If you showed me plenty of Cuban Americans, Argentinian Americans, old Mexican American families, I would probably say they're white, they're white, they're white, because they look white. And that's something that needs to be understood. And I hope that this video will allow you, the next time you see a news article about this, or the next time you're at a family dinner and you're talking about this, just tell your family that, hey, actually, that's not true, because the census poorly identifies people. Latin Americans should have their own check in the main population, not just a separate checkbox to then be used to exclude them from the white population. This video is made in hopes that you can decrease the polarization in America. It's truly something that I hope we can all stop, because it is frustrating for all sides, and we need to come together. And one way is to stop the panic over the changing demographics, because the reality is different from what the perceived truth is, because that is not in fact the truth. It is misinformation. So take this information, research it more if you want. My sources will be in the description. You can do a nice deep dive on this content. I hope you all have a good day. I may post again, I may not, on this topic. Goodbye. Take care of yourselves.